Hello, beautiful soul. I've entitled this live Ignited Soul Living. This is the name of my Instagram account. It's also the name of my business. And what Ignited Soul Living truly represents is the embodiment, the commitment, the choosing of living from our personal power. And what that means for me is the choosing to live from the power of our soul and through the power of our soul. This individuality that we've each come here with. And being honest, it's one of my greatest, like so many of us, it's one of my greatest opportunities for growth. It's one of my greatest opportunities to see where I hold myself back. And recently, I've been holding myself back a lot. I've been lost in thoughts of, I don't know what to do. I've had thoughts of, I don't believe in myself, I don't believe in my power, all of these things. And I've been waiting for the external world to give me evidence, to show me that what I am doing is quote unquote enough. And I posted here the other day a quote from, I can't remember the exact wording of it now, but it's not that, and this is coming back to what I want to say on this live, is what it says is basically God has not given up on you. You have given up on you. And that's not the correct wording, but this is what's coming out of my mouth right now is soul, God, the universe. Its focus is on us all the time. Its power, its peace, its divinity, its abundance, it's all of it. Its limitlessness is always being focused in on us. It is coursing through our DNA. And when we don't choose that back, we block it off. We create boundaries around ourselves so that we can't feel it, we can't experience it, we can't move from it. And that's what I've been doing. And I was sitting in meditation just before I've come on to do this live to engage with soul self, with original self, to inquire what my next step is. And what was obvious in that is to speak about my journey in the reclamation of my personal power, the reclamation of my soul power, of what it means day to day to source myself from my original self, from my soul identity, and to present to the outer world this bridge that is we must walk as we do this. And part of the work I do with women in particular, very rarely with men anymore, is this walking from an invisible bridge that we create for ourselves, walking from who we are to who it is that we are becoming. And it's not, even becoming is not a right word anymore. It's the releasing of the old so that the truth gets to radiate out. And it's uncomfortable, and so often when we see people online, we are told about the previous self, and we see the embodied full self. And so it feels slightly uncomfortable to show the in-between part, the part that doubts and fully trusts, the part that feels my power, and yet the part that feels at times powerless. And so I'm going to follow this guidance. I'm going to follow this thread of consciousness. I want to grow this account. I want to see how many new followers I can get in the next month or so. People who are on this similar journey and who are wanting to know what it truly is to walk this kind of bridge. Because to choose to source ourselves from soul goes against all our conditioning. To choose to dissolve our conditioning over and over is challenging at times. Some parts fall away like that, other parts have more residual things inside of us. And so for the next while, I'm just going to come and I'm going to share what I'm moving through, what I'm doing about that. Choosing to move and take action from my original self through my soul identity. Because so often we wait for the evidence before we move, meaning we wait and don't move. One of the things I shared recently as well is so many of us have these people-pleasing tendencies. And underneath that, on a spiritual level, we potentially also have God-pleasing tendencies. That we convince ourselves that if we are good enough, if we meditate enough, if we journal enough, if we whatever enough, then we will please God, please the universe, and God will give us what it is that we want. And that is not how it works. Because God is coursing through us, the universe is coursing through us. And the more we hold ourselves in that signal, the more the external world must shift to show that, to be the reflection is a word that's coming to mind, also not a good enough word, but yeah, that's what it is right now. So Ignited Soul Living, it is about living our greatest lives, experiencing our greatest dreams. And at the core of that is the choosing. This ignited soul living is about living as the ignited soul that we are. And using our humanity as the conduit for that. Using our body as the conduit for that. And being willing to be the source of who it is that we are. And that brings us to the continual choice point of personal power, of soul power. And it's so easy to let the excuses be there. It's so easy to blame things, blame circumstances, look to the past for the evidence that we don't have, that isn't there, and then flip that onto the future so that we are keeping ourselves disempowered, keeping ourselves unignited, shall we say. And to do this kind of work with ourselves, for ourselves, it is a luxury. To be in a position in this world, in our own lives, where this gets to be our priority is a luxury. And if we can allow ourselves to accept that and allow that frequency of luxury, it can awaken the cells of our bodies. To allow ourselves to luxuriate in our own soul. Because we have done so much healing work. We have great awareness. We have succeeded in places, and yet there's other places we want to succeed in. And we want to do that knowing we are here as and with our full soul self. That is a luxury that we get to give ourselves over and over. So if this resonates for you, I would love to hear from you. If you think someone that you know could benefit from hearing this, I would love to hear from you. I will keep following the guidance as it's presented as to how I'm sharing my own personal bridge of ignited soul living. And if you want to speak with me about me walking the bridge with you as you ignite yourself even more deep into the releasing of people pleasing, of God pleasing, so that you are the true governance of yourself, just reach out. I am here. That is it for now. Thank you.